All right. I'm with Paula Scanlan, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on to Walk-ins Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I feel like you've been through a lot in the past year. How are you doing?
Okay, I mean, some days are definitely harder than others. There's certain days where I wish no one had to talk about this. I would much rather go into my life and not have to do interviews and not have to tell people about my feelings and be vulnerable. But it's also really important work.
Yeah.
So it's a mix. It's definitely a mixed bag of emotions and feelings and everything.
So for people who don't know you, when you say you have to talk about this, will you just kind of explain to them briefly what this is?
I was teammates with a male individual that identified as a woman. And I've just been sharing my experience at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was a swimmer, and the university really silenced us to have discussions about what was going on. We couldn't express discomfort or feelings of unfairness of the situation. It was really a situation where we were told that we were the issue if we objected, and there was no room for discussion. And it's something that it's against women, and it's also free speech violations. This entire situation taught me that universities don't have compassion for real women, and they don't care about our ability to speak the truth.
Yeah, so you were teammates with Lia Thomas, who's now become quite infamous or famous, if you will. And I know that your teammate Riley Gaines was one of the first people who was on the team and came forward publicly at quite a high cost, it seems. What inspired you to come out and come forward after kind of seeing, I assume you saw what she went through?
Yeah, so Riley swam for the University of Kentucky and she raced Leah at the NCAA
Okay.
championship. And so her experience was just over one weekend and obviously incredibly unfair. So she tied Leah, and the NCAA basically told her that she could only get the sixth place trophy and the fifth place trophy had to go to Leah. So that's really like the moment that spurred her into her activism and her discussion about all of this. But it was interesting because the perspective of what we went through every single day for the full season was not there. Again, Riley and there was a few other girls that did smaller interviews during the NCAA championship. It was, they saw it for a week or a weekend, and we saw it every single day of just, we
Right.
knew for 2 years before it happened. We found out in the fall of 2019 that this was going to happen. And the best way to explain the situation, at least in my eyes, was that it was a slow moving train wreck. I thought that somebody would step in before it became reality. I thought the school wouldn't allow it. I thought the NCAA wouldn't allow it. I thought someone in the Ivy League wouldn't allow it. And each stage, no one ever did anything. And eventually, when the NCAA championship is what was needed to see how ridiculous it was. And then Leah tying Riley really spurred public, outrage on the
Right.
situation. Rightfully so, right? It was such a ridiculous situation. And Riley was able to, and it was just the strangest thing because tying is so rare in swimming. Like, I don't think people really realize that. So just the situation was just so crazy to me that happened, and that it was able to spur her into speaking out, and she really helped raise attention to this, which allowed me to feel comfortable speaking out about it. And there have been other girls who have said a few things. There's another NCAA athlete who talked about changing in a storage locker. It's definitely thanks to Riley and thanks to a lot of other women for just using their voice even once or twice.
You gave a really powerful testimony in front of Congress. What was that like? Were you terrified? I would be so scared.
Yes, I was very scared. Just because in general, obviously this entire situation has many facets to it, right? There's so many different layers, and a lot of people care differently about certain things. So there's some people who are only concerned about the athletic fairness of it. There's some people that are more concerned with the fact that men are now using locker rooms and bathrooms with girls. There are people who are more concerned about the silencing aspect of it, the free speech part, right? So everyone has their different part of the story that really hits them. And so something I personally had not really talked about my feelings around was the locker room. And I kind of decided, obviously I had feelings about it, and I did have nightmares for weeks about the situation because I had been sexually assaulted when I was in high school, and that was something that
Mhm.
was very hard for me. And I decided that the congressional testimony was like the place to really bring that up because I hadn't previously, and especially since previously, like Me Too and all of the sexual violence against women movements have been on the left. And I really just thought it would be a good way to point out their hypocrisy and just say, okay, you guys have previously spoken so much about caring about violence against women and sexual assault and Me Too. Okay, so how is this any different than that?
Mm.
And I definitely looked a lot of the Democrats directly in the face when I gave my testimony, and they looked uncomfortable, which was my goal. But it was definitely very nerve-wracking because it was a very personal thing. It also opened up kind of the floodgates of people asking me about it in interviews. And people just like randomly bring it up in interviews now. And it's like very uncomfortable because that was not something I really, imagined I would ever talk about on the news.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was definitely very nervous the night before, and I didn't know how it was gonna go over. And I knew that people on the left would be really defensive about it, which is exactly what happened. People have been suggesting I've made it up. People have been very aggressive, trying to suggest that you can't be sexually assaulted if you're not left leaning.
There's so much that I relate to you about, one being coming publicly talking about being sexually assaulted. The first media hit I ever did was actually on the Ben Shapiro election special in 2018. He had me on as an independent, and it was during all of the Kavanaugh stuff. And I felt like sexual assault survivors were just being used in ways politically and the way that both sides were talking about it was unsettling to me as somebody who experienced it. And I recently watched that media hit, and I was so nervous. I just kept, when he introduced me, he was like, Bridget, Phetasy, podcaster and sexual assault survivor. And I just kept saying, like, as a sexual assault survivor, I was like blanking, and it was so uncomfortable. And I've written about it, and it does open you up to like all kinds of, just people online are horrible. And it opens you up to, like you said, being asked questions about it and having to talk about it and be vulnerable. But I do think what you talked about, and that's why I cried when I saw your testimony, because I can relate to that. And I'll get like emotional now. It's just there's so much wrong with telling a woman that she just needs to be okay with that. And it feels so regressive to me. And I've been shouting about this for years, and really hearing someone like yourself who is brave enough to come forward and talk about what your experience was, like you said, every day in that locker room, and also coming at it from all, like you said, all the different perspectives. It's one of those things I don't know. It's hard for men to understand. It's hard for them. They're so physically imposing. And I think you've said it before, like, this is why most of the violence is done by men against women. It's so hard to understand if you've experienced that kind of trauma in your life. Being put in the position that you're put in and then being forced to be quiet about it, it is I'm like, isn't this like the opposite of everything, all the progress we've made? It just seems so crazy to me. And one of the things you said already today that really struck me is like, you kept waiting for kind of an adult in the room to step in. Why do you think they didn't?
I think the biggest thing is that these universities and these coaches and these professors are very scared of, the mob, and they're told that if they're not pushing these quote unquote progressive policies, that they're not good people, that they'll lose their job. And a lot of it is fear, in a sense of universities now want the exact messaging that they want to be pushed, and they want to control the narrative. And that's something I really noticed with my team, is that they wanted the narrative to be that the Penn swim team is this inclusive, welcoming place. And it's not to say that we weren't. Before any of this happened, we had difference of viewpoints. I actually talked about politics with a lot of my teammates, and we all disagreed, and we knew that.
Right.
I was always more right-leaning. I roomed freshman year with a girl who was very left-leaning, and we had discussions about things. We agreed on things, we disagreed on things, and it was never this horrible, "You're a horrible person," name-calling, all that stuff. Our team was always an open place, and that's something that bothered me so much, is they convinced us, and they convinced even themselves, that we had to be welcoming to a male that thought that they were a woman, welcome them to the women's team. And that was the way that we showed we were the most progressive team, not by having difference of opinions and supporting each other for who we were, no matter how different.
Right.
And that's something I think that's kind of gotten lost, is that it's almost that everybody needs to be the same, not different, to be positive, to be progressive. But I just don't know where that got lost in translation.
Yeah. It just seems strange, though. It feels like this abandonment of women. You know, I don't understand how a lot of these adults in the room who are supposed to be protecting women and safeguarding their spaces have convinced themselves that this is progressive when it does, like I said before, feels regressive. And what have you heard from, you know, obviously, do some of your teammates disagree with you, or your former teammates disagree with you? And how do they justify this? Or what is I don't know. It seems like so many mental gymnastics, because I can't believe I'm even having this conversation with you. Like these conversations that I have, I'm like, when I saw your testimony, I was like, how are we here? How did we get here?
I know. I honestly, the funny thing to me is that it is hard. Like, having people tell you that they think you're a horrible person and they hate you is challenging. And I've had people who I care deeply about tell me that. And that's hard. But the thing that's interesting to me, and the difference between feeling like everybody doesn't like me and having to accept that, is when you dig into why they don't like you. And every person who said something negative towards me, whether it be directly or indirectly, they always put in the word bigot, white supremacy, or transphobe. It's always one of those three reasonings, and there's no substance. And for me, I've always been part of, like, my family's always had open conversations, and my parents, my brother, always criticized me when I did things, corrected me if I was wrong. But it was always productive criticisms, productive, corrections. And something I've noticed with this is these people are like, okay, I hate you. And I'm like, okay, well then what can I do better? And they're like, just stop being a transphobe. And I go, what does that mean? And there's no conversation. And it's, again, if I'm doing something that's so wrong, I want to improve. I want to know why you think that I'm a horrible person. I don't want to be a horrible person. I don't want to be known as unkind. I try my best to be kind, to be caring, to be all of those things. And you say that I'm not, but can you elaborate? Because I would like to work on it. And they're like, how dare you ask me that? You're a transphobe.
Do the work.
And so it's like, I at the beginning, I wanted to try to, like, cover up, like, work with them and go backwards and figure all this stuff out. But I realized there was no meeting them in the middle ground, because it was just everything that I said, even if I adjusted my language, if I used the correct pronouns, or if I said that a little softer, or if I said this or that, it was never enough. I had to completely agree with their viewpoint, or I'm a horrible person.
So were you outspoken right from the get-go in 2019 when you heard that this was kind of, like you said, this slow motion train wreck was coming down the tracks?
Yeah, the beginning, I spoke a lot to people individually, and mostly people outside of the team. Obviously, I had friends in college who weren't swimmers. Granted, not many, because you spend so much time with your team, most of your friends end up being on the team. But I talked to people a lot about it, and the biggest thing was I would tell people on different sports teams and non-athletes, and they would say, "That just sounds ridiculous. There's no way that's happening."
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, no, it is. Like, we've been told." And they're like, "It'll get handled." Like, just very dismissive. And then I would have one-on-one conversations with people on the team, and people who were left-leaning, right-leaning, were, men, women, people on the men's team, people on the women's team. And they all agreed to some extent that it was unfair. And they knew that it was going to be an issue, but it was just, okay, what can we do? What can I possibly do about the situation? Like, I can think that it's unfair.
Did you talk to any of the adults who were kind of making these decisions?
We talked to the coaches, and the coaches were like, it's the NCAA guideline. Like, we're going to work it all out. The reason that this kind of happened that was so blindsiding to so many people is because of COVID. So originally the plan was for Lia to join the women's team in the fall of 2020. So the progressive Ivy League decided that because of COVID, we couldn't have a single athletic competition from the entirety of 2020 to 2021. So every single athlete at Penn, fall sport, winter sport, spring sport, doesn't matter, did not have a season for a year.
Wow.
And so in that, Leah, or Will, whatever you want to say, was supposed to graduate in 2021. So when we found out about this no athletic competition from 2020 to 2021, we said, oh, Leah's probably going to graduate, so it won't be an issue. And then Leah opted to take a gap year, which then meant Leah would come back in the fall of 2021 as a senior when they were supposed to have already graduated. So that's why the whole situation was like, okay, then people had hope. And there was another girl on the team who had equal opinions to me. And she's not publicly outspoken, but she was also outspoken amongst the team. And the two of us would talk a lot about this. She was convinced that it was going to fix the entire situation. She said the one good thing of our season, of us losing an entire season of competition because of COVID, is that this entire situation will be avoided. And then when she found out about the gap year, she was wrecked again.
Oh no, this is insane. I mean, it's insane that you guys even lived under the kind of shadow of this happening. And really talk to me about like the silence. It seems like you guys were just so gaslit, it's like crazy to me. And I guess there's so much fear, like you said, from the top down. But I imagine being students, you're afraid you're going to lose scholarships. You're afraid you're going to lose job opportunities. You're afraid your name will be destroyed and your reputation will be destroyed. I mean, there's a lot of reason to just stay silent and put your head down and be like, this is fine. But how did they kind of trick you guys into being quiet about this?
So at the very beginning of the season, there had been discussions about the locker room, and originally it was told, and I don't know like how true this was or how serious our coaching staff and the university was about this, but we were told, oh, we'll consider having Leah change in a different locker room or maybe stay in the men's locker room or whatever. And so that was because that was the first concern I think people had. It wasn't even about the fairness aspect. It was like, oh, well, like that's kind of strange because this person's on the men's team. And so we were told that. And then the season started in the fall of 2021. And so many people had been just so excited to come back. Because again, imagine working your entire life towards something and having an entire year off from your sport.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like psychologically, everybody just you don't care. You're just excited to be back. It's like you haven't trained consistently for a year, maybe more. And
that's so interesting.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of it, like I would rationalize, and I took some time off from the team in COVID. I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue to swim. I had a really hard time with like a lot of my other issues and, not related to this. And other girls had the same thing. There was a few other people who also opted to take some time away and weren't sure if they were going to come back to swimming come senior year. It was just a really hard time for athletes mentally. And it was hard for pretty much not just athletes, but every college student that's in that age range. I saw so many people struggle with mental health issues during this COVID year.
Wow.
So just take all of that and then bring everybody back to campus for the first time in a year and a half.
And this was your senior year?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had 3 semesters off. So the last time I had been in an in-person class, I was 19 years old, and I'm 21 at this point.
So you lost your senior. Yeah, it's so crazy to me.
Junior year.
Your junior year. But did you guys do remote school? So you still. Yep. Okay, so you did remote school and then came back as a senior, but hadn't been in person.
No. I was living in Philly, and so were a lot of other students, and there was a little bit of on-campus housing for people. But again, quite literally, my birthday's right around when COVID started. So I was basically 19 the last time I went to an in-person class, and then the next time again, it was fall, and I was 21, turning 22.
That's so crazy.
Next year. Yeah. It was a big chunk and that's a very impressionable time, and it was challenging in so many ways. And I think So what I'm getting at in that situation is that a lot of everyone's excitement to be back in person and be back training again and have a season again and see all your friends again and go to class in a building kind of overshadowed anyone's feeling of resentment towards the situation. And at least that's how I saw it in my personal experience looking back at it. That's how I'm assuming other people. Again, I can't speak for other people, but that's at
Right.
least how I experienced it. And it was just, okay, well, it doesn't matter. It's fine that we're going to have to undress next to a male. It's fine that girls are going to lose their spot on the roster. It's fine that our competitions are going to be unfair because I get to be back in person. I get to have class again. I get to see friends I haven't seen in a year and a half. And I think quickly I figured out that that justification was just completely false and I was just lying to myself and the truth. But it's still definitely an aspect to cover up why maybe more people weren't outraged about it immediately.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you guys lost so much. And so you're coming into this situation not from a place of power, but from a place of just happy to be here. And it's never a strong place to come from.
That's how the university phrased all of sports to us. We were supposed to wear a mask while practicing, and they said to us, like, "Oh, you guys are so lucky because you're the only sport on campus that doesn't have to wear their mask while practicing."
Like,
Because
no
we're the swim
shit.
team and we're
Yeah.
gonna drown. Exactly. And I had a conversation with a guy on my team, and he was like, "I wish I was a fly on the wall in the room where the athletic department met and said, should we make the swim team wear their masks while practicing?"
It's just like levels of incompetence I can't even get my mind around.
Yeah, and we'd have to put it on as soon as we'd finish. The worst part is that there's like a one wall that everybody just like would stick their mask on. And I would put my mask in like a corner and I would come back and my mask would be gone. I'd be like, somebody took my mask. Like we probably spread more COVID that way than if we just didn't wear a mask on deck at all. It was just, and again, it was everything that was happening. They were saying like, you guys are privileged to get to do your sport. Like if you have COVID cases, this, or you can't, they said you couldn't rush frats or sororities. Obviously that didn't apply to me. I was a senior. Because you're going to spread COVID, or like your season will get canceled because you're going to spread. It was just so much. I think a lot of this does relate to COVID, and I hate to be like that conspiracy theorist that like brings in COVID because it was a horrible thing. There were people who died. Obviously that's true, but just all college students were completely told that every single thing they got from college, whether it literally be taking a class in person, was a privilege, not the requirement. When every other class of students have gone to college ever before had the luxury of taking classes in person. We were just told that that was not a given.
And it's weird because you're paying so much money for college. So for them to suddenly act like I feel like COVID really was, and this is not a conspiracy, I think it's just a fact. Like my husband and I were talking about this yesterday, how it seems like a lot of businesses use COVID to scale back their service or the quality of their food or the quality, things that like hotels don't do as much anymore because of COVID. And a lot of people have scaled back and cut corners and they just never returned. So, and now they're acting like, oh, you should just be happy that you're getting this at all. And it's like, because everything was taken away, but it is really interesting because it's something I hadn't even considered, how psychologically more pliable you would be coming out of like 2 years of lockdown or whatever, or a year and a half and into like, oh yay, we're happy to be back and whatever. When you came back and this reality was kind of thrust upon you, was it something that just you and your buddy were upset about, or were there girls who was everyone a little? I mean, that's got to be kind of awkward.
Yeah, I mean, people were very uncomfortable, but it was one of those things where you could have a private one-on-one conversation with somebody. Like there were girls I talked to one-on-one about this, and then we go to the group meeting and they'd be like, "Oh, I can't believe there are people out there that are saying that this is not fair." And I would just look at them and be like, yesterday in class, like I had a class with one of my teammates and we would talk about it all the time. And she was like, "Oh, this won't go on for much longer. Like this is happening, that's happening." then she'd go to like the group meetings and be like, oh, I can't believe how transphobic the internet is. So a lot of it is this group think that you have to show off that you have an opinion to the group.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have something that's opposing to the group, you're not allowed to share it. And I think like that's something that one of the girls, there was another girl on the team who, again, like publicly didn't really say much about it, but I could tell like privately that she was uncomfortable with the situation because she was changing in the family locker room during the season and in the
Mm-hmm.
bathroom stall, but we never really talked about it because we weren't very close. And we've now reconnected, and she told me, she said the hardest part for her was that our team dynamic, being a group of, 20-something-year-old girls and younger, that our team were the type of girls, and this is what my teammate told me, were the type of girls that if you'd get up and go to the bathroom at dinner, everyone would start talking about you. It was this environment where everybody needed to talk bad about somebody else in order to forward themselves, so they could say things like, "Oh, Paula is so transphobic, I can't believe her," and that would be, like, a talking point to get them in with everybody else and make them
Right.
friends, and obviously, it was such a big part of what we were going through that was almost like the easiest way to gain acceptance from your peers was to bash people that might even have the same idea you do. You just know that it's an unpopular opinion, and you can use that to kind of boost yourself socially, at least in your mind. And the virtue signaling of, "Oh, well, I'm morally superior to Paula because I'm so supportive of this,"
Right. Which is so crazy to
even
me.
if you yourself don't believe in it. And that's the
Yeah.
worst part.
Yeah, no, that is the worst part. And I don't know I'm writing, it's funny because I wrote this piece that should be coming out soon, hopefully. But your testimony really inspired a lot of it, because one of the things that makes me so upset about this time that we're living in is that it's teaching young people, but particularly young women, not to trust themselves. So if you have this icky feeling, or if you feel uncomfortable, you're being told to put your discomfort aside for a man, which again, I'm older than you, much older than you. And I came from this generation where it was like, you get loud, you don't worry about making men comfortable. It was like a completely different feminism. It pushed back against this idea that women are supposed to be kind of quiet and subservient and put the comfort of men before their own comfort, because this is something that women have traditionally been socialized to do outside of like letting a male in the locker room, just like, oh, I'm uncomfortable and I'll just be quiet because I don't want to get in trouble, or I don't want to make this guy uncomfortable. There was this book that came out when I was graduating from high school, The Gift of Fear. And he talks about how humans, women in particular, and this was like a huge book. It was all about domestic abuse, and it was on Oprah, and she did a 10-year anniversary. And this is like the generation I grew up in. And he talks about how humans are the only animal where like a woman will be standing at an elevator, and the elevator will open, and there will be a man standing there, and it'll he might give her an uncomfortable feeling, and she'll get in that elevator anyways, as he says, like a sealed metal soundproof box with someone that is triggering your kind of fight or flight. And it's just because she didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable, that like every other animal would run in the opposite direction. We're the only animals that kind of talk ourselves out of these feelings. And this is what your whole generation is, I feel like, has like this whole new level of this going on. And when you started talking, it came out that, they were kind of writing these letters basically telling you guys that you couldn't say anything, or what was it that the school was saying to you? Like they were offering you guys counseling?
Yeah,
This is insanity.
yes, and that's something I was gonna get into next. We had, so at the beginning, I kind of did the completely ignore the situation approach,
Right.
which is so fascinating because it's like everybody's like, "Are we gonna address this?" And they're like, so here's compliance, here's your paperwork, this is our schedule." You know what I mean? Like, just there's no issue. But it wasn't until the media caught wind. So again, at the beginning of the season, it wasn't really clear if Leah was gonna be incredibly fast. Like, we knew that if Lia had swam even remotely close to their times on the men's team, that it would have been ridiculous, but we weren't sure to what extent that was going to happen, obviously, until the season began. And it was once Lia started competing, stories started to come out. And it was once the media came out that there was this event in December that Lia won the event by like 30 plus seconds, which is really, really, really ridiculous in swimming.
Yeah.
If you don't know anything about swimming, take my word for you. That's ridiculous. That just doesn't happen. And so that's when the media started coming in, and they realized, I think, that girls on the team were starting to get approached by media. And so that's when they came in, they were like, we need to control the narrative. So they basically told us, Lia swimming is a non-negotiable. They said, we're here to help make you okay with that. And they said, here's a whole panel of resources. And so notably, one of the resources they brought there was psychological services. And they said, oh, look, we're here to talk to you and help you make it okay. And then they also brought in the athletic department. They were like, the media is not your friend. You're going to be labeled poorly for the rest of your life if you speak on this. This is not a legacy you want to follow you for the rest of your life. You will be on the wrong side of this, and that is not the side that you want to have your name be attached to.
Wow.
So it's just that. And I think the biggest thing is, especially in the Ivy League, right? Like, you go to a school like that because you want to have a good job.
Right.
Because you want to succeed academically, because you want to succeed in the work world. And if you tell 20-something-year-old girls, or any 20-something-year-old boys too even, that they will not get a job and everything their parents paid for, or if they receive some types of scholarships or whatever, is gone to waste, that's pretty scary. And for me, that was something that it was incredibly scary because, again, I'm half Asian. My mom is very culturally Asian. She's an immigrant. And her entire philosophy has always been, you must go to a good school and you must get a good job. And you must not ruffle feathers while you do that. And that was like something I had been raised on. So it was so hard for me to, I have to go against the grain on this. I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to give up everything that I've dedicated my life to. I was studying engineering in college. It's hard. It's not just a degree that I can throw away. I mean, now that I'm talking about this stuff and I'm doing more political science, like communications work, it does kind of seem like a waste. But I mean, at the time, it was not something I could just throw away.
Yeah. Well, and it's bullying. They essentially just bullied you guys into silence. That's terrifying. This is like a lot of the stuff that you see with the rhetoric in and around psychology when you're even talking with these younger kids, where they're like, oh, would you rather have a dead kid when the kid wants to transition? It's like, I don't know. It feels like bullying. I mean, it just feels like old school bullying. And it also feels like you're just terrifying people with these ultimatums of like, oh, we'd hate to take your career away. Be a shame if anything happened to your reputation. These are things that mean a lot to people socially and economically, and it hinders you, and Google never goes away. And this is one of the questions I was going to ask you about, is before you spoke out, how were your parents supportive? Were they kind of like, where were the parents in all of this too for all of these girls?
Yeah, I mean, parents were very upset about it, but a lot of it was, it's very hard as a parent to want something more than your kid does, and that's something that's not independent of this situation. I've seen this I know plenty of kids I grew up with that had parents that wanted things more than they did, or like wanted to live vicariously through their kid. And I think a lot of it is kind of like the social pressure of being there every day. Like, your parents will step in and try to do something, and you'll be like, Mom, stop. Like, you can't. And I know that a lot of talking to a lot of these different people. There's a mom on the Yale swim team who's very outspoken about this. She's a close friend of mine. And I'm actually from Connecticut, so Yale is like very close to me, and I know a lot of people there. And the mom was kind of in a situation, the mom was very uncomfortable, and she was a former NCAA athlete, not a swimmer. And the mom was very uncomfortable. The daughter was almost like, no, you can't. Like, please, Mom, like, for me, you can't. And so a lot of it is like, yes, of course the parents are upset and they want to do things. And there were parents on my team that wrote letters. There's a parents group chat that would try to do things. But at the end of the day, how much can you do if your kid doesn't want you to do that? and the kid is the one in the situation, right? Like,
Right.
okay, then your mom's doing that. You're not going to stop telling your mom what's going on. And that was like my situation a little bit, where I would just say, like, I don't want to talk to my parents about what's going on because I'm worried that they might tell the wrong person and get me in trouble. And my parents were definitely upset about it. I mean, the harder part about this situation for my parents is that we're from Connecticut. Notoriously, it's a liberal state. That this entire, and I don't agree with this at all, this entire issue has been politicized, that if you believe that men cannot be women, you are a right-leaning, horrible individual. And I talk to people who are very left-leaning and they agree with it. And then I'm like, oh, well, would you vote that way? And they're like, no, I'm okay with voting for men being in the locker room with women because I just don't like the other people that support it. And I'm like, why can't we look at this one issue and say, like, demand more from, if you're left leaning, demand more from the Democrats on this? And they're like, refuse. They're like, no, I can't. So that was the harder thing, is just, was I gonna have a target on my head being from where I'm from? Were my parents' friends gonna disagree? I mean, I've had family tell my parents that they strongly disagree with what I'm doing because I'm a quote unquote right-wing talking point and whatever, when I don't think this issue should be politicized whatsoever. So it's hard, but they're definitely supportive, and there definitely been a lot of people who, both sides of the aisle, that are very supportive of what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's something too, and I in no way can, it's not even similar or comparable, but just even when I started kind of pushing back against some of the stuff on the left that I was seeing, like attacking comedians, this was years ago, 2015, 2016, and then there's this right-wing kind of attention and support, and I was very wary of being kind of weaponized by the right, because it would be easy for me to kind of lean into, well, there would probably have been a lot of money, but also just being used in that way, as like, in the same way I see the left use people all the time, like the Parkland kids or whatever. I didn't want to just be like some pawn in this, and like you say, this kind of political game. And this, how do you feel about it now? You know, now that you've spoken out and you spoke to Matt Walsh, correct?
Yeah.
And yeah, were you on Megyn Kelly?
No, I haven't been on Megyn Kelly.
You should go on Megyn's show.
Yeah, it's in the work. Funny enough, they emailed me like right away. And it was funny because I actually had a corporate job. I was working as a product manager for about a year after graduating, and I have now left that. But it was funny because right when my story broke, I got an email from someone from Megyn Kelly's team in my work email, like my old company, like, P. Scanlan at my old company's name. And I was freaking out because I was like, oh my gosh, wait, this is so cool. But also, how did you get this email address of all email addresses? And I responded back with my personal one. And I was like, hi, like, I don't actually book any media through that account. Please don't email it.
Yeah.
I was worried that somebody in HR or tech or IT was going to flag me and fire me. Obviously, I left on my own terms and everything was fine. And I did not get fired for my viewpoints. But very early on, that was a concern. And I did kind of balance both, just speaking independently a few times and working my corporate job for about 6 weeks. And that was probably the craziest 6 weeks of my entire life because I did not sleep. I would go to work during the day, and then I would, get home at 6 o'clock and someone would want to interview me, or I would, I went on Laura Ingraham at like 10:30 at night, and I had to be up at 6 for work the next morning. So it was definitely very challenging. But yeah, I mean, for me, and I do understand the agreement that everybody wants to push their political agenda, of course. And I'm not stupid. I know that, and people accuse me of not understanding it. In terms of money, I know people make money off of my name. I haven't seen it. I work for the Independent Women's Forum. They pay me because I'm an employee. Yeah. And that is the only place that pays me. I'm not getting paid to go do these interviews. I don't get paid to go on the news. I'm not paid to be here right now and talk about it.
Nobody understands this. It's so funny. I'm like, do you guys not know that like media hits are not something you get paid for generally? Or, unless you're, I don't know, even like really famous people. It's not even like you're getting paid to go on Rogan. Like no one's getting paid to do this. It's strange to me.
So, I mean, of course, yeah, and it's so funny, but it's for me, it's I'm gonna just tell my story the way that I want to, and I'm open to talking to anyone. There have been a limited number of left-leaning people that have tried to talk about it, which is unfortunate. I think there should be more conversations. We've done a limited number. There are a few people willing to talk about it. Generally, it's mostly independents and Republicans to talk about this. And
Yeah.
as unfortunate as that is, I can only tell what I can tell. Anyone that can help get reach to this issue is good. And I've noticed I do have followers that tell me they're diehard Democrats and they 100% support me. And that's what I want. I want this to be an issue that's not left or right. It's common sense and it wakes everybody up. Because at the end of the day, I'm working right on policy. I want policy changes. I don't care about the politics of it. Um, and again, yes, of course, it's more right leaning. Of course it is. Admittedly, I've always been more conservative, and I'm not gonna deny that. Of course, I have my biases. Everybody does. But we have to look past that and really just work together on what we know common sense is. And common sense tells me that if you're a man, you can't just become a woman. It just doesn't work that way. And I'm sure maybe they can develop some scientific surgery where they start shaving parts off your bone density, which would be so intrusive, but ultimately, that would be the only way it would be possible to fully make a man into a woman, right? You'd have to really get advanced surgeries that change the size of your heart, your lung capacity,
Yeah,
the
I mean, I
structure of
think
your
you'd have
bones,
to like
but
change your
right? You'd have to
gametes or
completely
whatever.
yes, and I mean, science is wonderful. I have maybe one day they can figure that out, but that's like the most invasive thing that's probably ever gonna be done, let alone like, you know, cloning yourself.
Yeah. And something I don't think enough people really take into consideration is that you went through this and then it was on the heels of COVID. Like, even I didn't have that awareness. So, just how much psychologically you guys have gone through just with COVID alone. I just can't even imagine. I can't imagine. I thought about this a lot during COVID because I was in a different phase in my life, but I was like, thinking about people like yourself who you have all this momentum. It's like that you're headed into your junior year and you've got all of this momentum in your sports and all of this momentum in your life. And then just everything stopped and what that did to so many people and how on the heels of it, you have all of this like blatant insanity that's just somehow. And again, no matter how many people I talk to about this, I don't understand how it's been so mainstreamed. Like, did you see The Incredibles? Have you ever seen that
Yeah,
movie?
yeah.
So, when Dash is like, slow down, slow down, slow down at the very end, when they're like, I'm like, I feel like this is Leah, what Leah ended up doing after they realized that they couldn't beat people by 30 seconds. So it was like intentionally slowing themselves down. It just seems, I don't understand, I guess, the psychology there either, like how you can be okay with that. How you can be okay with just women being uncomfortable around you in a locker room, blowing people's records out of the water. This is something that I also just don't understand. And as someone who is teammates with them, do you have any insight?
Yeah, well, it was very much the answer to every question was, well, if they don't agree with me changing or me swimming, they're just transphobic and that's their problem. It was very much a situation where everything was just put onto you. It's you're the problem. You're the issue. And for me, that was very challenging. I honestly stopped seeing people. I hid in my room in college. I didn't go out. I didn't socialize with my teammates. I barely left the house after this because I just felt so discouraged. I felt so isolated. It was just like the most isolating experience ever where it was senior year and there was all these senior clubs and all these events to go to and you're legal at the bar and like that's a big deal because you couldn't get in as a freshman and a sophomore and it's like I didn't even care to go there. Um and it's just isolating and you feel
Yeah.
like everyone around you and it's weird because I'm sure everyone else feels the exact same way. I'm sure my other teammates who disagreed with this also felt isolated and alone, and there were other girls I noticed who socialized with the team less too. But it's you can't even admit it to yourself, let alone have a conversation with a teammate who might be feeling the exact same way. It's incredibly isolating. And it goes back to COVID, because that was what happened during COVID, is that you weren't allowed to socialize with people,
Right.
right? So it's like that one was forced, and this is kind of a self-isolation, and it's just, yeah, socialization in general of people my age is just so off, and I don't know, and even younger kids, I don't know how their development will be about that, but it's just this general feeling of, I have to be my own person, and do everything myself, and I can't depend on other people. And again, even Leah is saying, well, I'm happy and that's all that matters, right? It's like a me
Yeah.
thing on the opposite side of it, right? So it's, I don't know. And I think a lot of it, I don't know, I think a lot of it came from COVID. This really blew up during COVID. The increase of people identifying as trans and non-binary. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know why that happened the way that it did, but it's definitely not, I wouldn't say it's a coincidence.
Yeah. Do you hear from a lot of young women?
Yeah, I do. And I also hear from young women that tell me I'm a horrible person too. So there's two ends to that. But yeah, there's a lot of young people and they're scared. There was a girl who reached out to me from a collegiate swim program. And she told me about how there's might be somebody who's identifying as non-binary or trans that might start using their locker room, maybe on the men's team. The whole situation is incredibly unclear. The girl deleted all of her socials after messaging me, and then reached out to me from a different account on Instagram and just said, "Can you please delete any interactions we've had? I don't wanna get found out." She didn't
Wow.
even tell me her name. I didn't even know what her name was. I just knew what school she went to, and again, I'm not gonna name that because she's
Right.
afraid, but it's just what they put these people through is that they're telling and this school's policy basically said that you could be kicked off the team or expelled from the university if you even raise a concern about what locker room somebody's using, because that's considered sexual harassment. If you question what locker room somebody is in, that is sexual harassment.
Is this like Title IX? Has this been encoded in Title IX?
I previously no, but there are a lot of people who are working to modify the definition of Title
Right.
IX. That's something that's really scary. Again, I don't think that that had, at least at Penn, I don't think that had gotten to that point yet.
Right.
I think it's very wishy-washy, but it's starting to become the definition of Title IX is anybody who identifies as a woman, and what or like the term woman has been changed, right? So previously, the definition everybody is accepted as a woman is an adult human female. But because of all this controversy in the last couple of years, if you notice, a lot of these big dictionaries are changing the definition to an adult human female or anyone who identifies as a woman.
Right.
So it's like a lot of this, and this is not just with the word woman, a lot of these words as society are kind of being modified. I was trying to say
It
two
is
words at once.
mortifying.
It is modified. Freudian slip. Um, are being modified to mean what people want them to mean, not mean what they actually do mean or what they previously mean. And it's just how do you exist as a society if we can't even agree linguistically on what words mean? Like it's just
Mhm.
like I can't even have a conversation with somebody and be referring to the same thing. And I see my comments on my socials and people are going back and forth about it being like, "Oh, we are supporting women because trans women are women and women are anyone who identifies as a woman, and how dare you suggest that being female means that you like is the only way to be a woman." And it's like, "What?"
Don't read the comments.
Oh, I mean, I don't try to, but it's, it's sometimes, like you
I
just
know, it
pull
sneaks
the
through,
refresh and you
yeah.
see it and it's like funny to me because people are going at it and it's hilarious to me that there's like, I have haters, but I also have supporters, and they go at it with each other, and I'm like, "I'm just gonna let them do what they wanna do." Like, if they're not, as long as they're not sending me death threats, I'm open to the conversation.
I think there's a lot of radical feminists who are on the left who agree with you, like, or not even radical feminists, just kind of old school feminists. Like, I guess they're considered TERFs now, but it seems like you wouldn't be alone entirely on being abandoned by the left. I do see a lot of women kind of my age who are pushing back against this, and I don't consider myself of the right, despite what the internet would say about me. um, were you raised conservative?
No, I wasn't
Interesting.
actually. Yeah, and that's what people always and that's something that's very, very interesting is people always say that kids at my age are conservative, have just been brainwashed by their parents. My parents are independent. That's the best way to explain them. They voted for Obama the first time. They didn't vote for Obama the second time. They didn't vote for Trump ever. My mom voted for Biden, I think. This past time, my dad voted an independent. 2016, they didn't vote for either. But it was a very much a our family dynamic has always been open conversation where we could debate
Mhm.
these issues. We could talk about whatever we wanted and have independent viewpoints. And I think that's something that kind of shaped me. But for myself becoming conservative, it really had to do with me being assaulted. I went to a very
Right.
notoriously liberal high school. So I went to an all girls school and we had a brothers school, so we shared classes. But all of the girls in my school were very into the virtue signaling and the posting of all this, all of the Me Too and all the sexual assault and all of the LGBT whatever. And I just started to see how out of control it got. And then the interesting thing that happened to me is I was assaulted by a male classmate at our brother's school, and we all knew each other. We had classes together. And all of the girls at school who were posting these things were going in the other corner and being like, she's a liar. She lied about being assaulted. And that
Um,
really yeah, at 16, that really opened my eyes to how the people who were posting these things on social media
we're full of
didn't
shit.
care, and they were yeah, and it was true, and it was interesting because there was reporters who started digging around. So my parents ended up filing a lawsuit in regards to my assault, and there have been 2 lawsuits and won't get into it, but anyway, there was reporters digging around, and my brother was he went to the same school as me, the brother school, though, and we all knew the same people. He started kind of flagging girls that were posting all of this social media stuff and saying, "Oh, like this girl is very active about posting how she feels about this issue. Why don't we have the reporter reach out?" And they'd be like, "Lose this number. Don't you dare talk to me." And I reached out to another girl I knew who was posting avidly about my lawsuit without even knowing it was me and was saying, "This is so disgusting. Like, you're going down like to the police department, like all this stuff to these people who were involved in the suit." And then I reached out to her and I was like, "Oh, like, will you put your money where the mouth is and just talk about what you experienced at the school?" Because she had personal experiences with how they were treated. And she goes, "No, absolutely not. You're on your own. Good luck."
You've been through
So,
a lot.
I mean, like, it's just life. Like, everyone has their own
No,
thing and everyone
totally,
has
but
their
you
own
have
thing
been
that
through a
they've
lot.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. But it just opened my eyes up to how these people, were just so hypocritical and how these, pushing the progress on these issues weren't doing anything for the actual people going through them.
Right.
And it wasn't until so that was kind of like the preamble of like what I went through my junior year of high school. And I was like, hmm. And then I just started like asking questions about like, okay, why does everybody hate Trump so much? And it was like, there's no answer to that. And it was like, okay, well, what's wrong with Republicans? And it was like, nobody had an answer. And it wasn't until my summer between my junior and senior of college, I mean, of high school, sorry, going into my senior of high school, I went to go on vacation and I went to Hawaii and I went to California, 2 very liberal states.
Yes.
And I saw the homeless populations there and people living in poverty. And I saw how people who were left leaning treated them and talked about them. And it just felt so demeaning and just, they were like, oh, they're so poor and they can never do anything on their own. We must help them. And it's like, okay, of course you should help people who are in need. But to suggest that they're incapable of doing anything without your help is really regressive, not
Mhm.
progressive.
Mhm.
And I just started opening my eyes up and I started doing research on all of this, like these policies and how they work and how they weren't effective and just seeing what I saw like out on the West Coast. And I kind of came home and I was like, hmm. And I started doing my research on like what Republicans believe and what, Democrats believe. And at this point I was like, oh, I'm a libertarian, like, and then I kind of, inched closer and closer. And then when I got to college, I joined college Republicans. And funny enough, joining that group of people, there were so many diverse viewpoints. Everyone would think that we were a cult, but there were people in there who believed in abortion up to 12 weeks, and we would debate it. I mean, I was that's never been an issue I've been huge on talking about, but I would sit back and watch the debates, and we'd debate about border policy, and we'd debate about just not even like publicly, like just hanging out as a group. We would have conversations and we would debate it. And I was like, huh, the right actually has people who disagree and can talk about it versus the people on the left that I was seeing couldn't. So it was just very interesting. And again, I'm always open to changing my viewpoint. I'm always open to hearing people that disagree with me. But it's always just, yeah, it's like early on, my parents always allowing me to ask those questions. And then once I started realizing there were people who wouldn't even answer my questions, that's kind of when I started to open my eyes, in short, of that long tangent. But yes.
It's really interesting too because I know I have some family members who have kids who are actually, I think, exactly the same age as you. And a lot of them went into college pretty liberal leaning and then got pretty red pilled during like lockdowns and the vaccine mandates. I had a few of my friends' kids who were like, I don't need to, like, it's stupid that I need to get this booster to go back to school. It's stupid. And so people who kind of were not questioning really anything or any of their beliefs were suddenly awakened to different points of view just because they were almost forced into it by necessity. And you said this was in between your junior and senior year is that when you went to California and Hawaii?
Yes. Yeah, in high school.
Oh,
So
in high school.
about 17.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Cause those are pretty, I mean, it wasn't even like as bad. I just moved from LA. It was not so that would be like what, 2017, 2018?
Yeah, 2017, summer of 2017.
Okay, yeah. So it was like, it's funny. That was right when I started noticing the kind of pre-Mageddon vibe that I call it of the city, where I really started thinking about leaving. And I was like, oh, this city is not, I had moved there in 2007. And so I really, in 10 years, had seen a lot of the decay happening and the decline. But it's like, oh, it's so much worse, like so much worse than even. So it's fascinating to me that you picked up on this, even in Connecticut. There are parts of Connecticut that aren't great either. I have siblings in Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, I see it, but it's just a smaller place that it's just like not really clear. Like I've always known people
Yeah.
are liberal, and there's always been like liberal ideology, but it's not just like a super popular state. 'Cause it's not so big, right? Like if you're gonna like try to like freeload off the government, you want to choose a larger state like New York or California. And it wasn't that clear, but it really just took like kind of getting out of like seeing it large scale applied. And New York City actually, so I live in New York City now. I'm actually home in Connecticut right now, at my parents' house. But in New York City, I've also noticed it get a lot worse because I
Yeah.
grew up going into the city. The swim team that I swam for in high school practiced in the Bronx. And I've just seen things change. And I've also seen my family's originally from Queens in New York. And I've also seen, interestingly, is that our family friends in Queens, they're starting to get more red pilled because they're seeing what's happening to their children in the schools. And so it's like in the weirdest way, there's a very strong Republican growing group in Queens. You heard it here first. I don't see the district flipping quite yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if down the line it did. And it's just very interesting seeing these people kind of go through these phases where they're like, okay, these government handouts are great or whatever. And we know a lot of our family friends in the New York area are Hispanic, and they're seeing a lot of them are legal, and they're seeing illegal immigrants kind of take things away from them. They're like, and so
Yeah.
it's very interesting when you actually go into these areas and talk to these people and see what they think. It's very interesting that the perspective is very different than what the media shows, and that, "Oh, they
Totally.
have to have our help," and they're like, "No, I'm doing fine." They have small businesses, they have a home and an apartment, and they're okay, they don't need government handouts. Are they the most wealthy? Are they as wealthy as people who live in the suburbs are? No. Do they need to be? Also, no. Um, so it's very, very interesting once you actually talk to these people, and that's kinda like something I've been very fortunate to just meet people of all walks of life even before any of this happening, where I think my perspective on just the reality of why people vote the way they do has just been very open, just because again, we used to live in Queens and now we live in the suburbs. And so just having that perspective from both sides is just, I think I honestly wish everyone could just kind of sit down in a day in both areas and just see.
Yeah. Queens is like my most diverse borough in the whole United States or something. It's crazy. The level you can definitely get a good perspective on things in Queens. What do you want to do now? What is it? How is this kind of, first of all, how are you doing? I mean, I know that, are you feeling
Yeah, I
okay?
mean,
Like
yeah.
how,
It's hard, but it's, like, the right thing. I think the biggest thing for me is it's been very freeing to just tell the truth. Like, at the
yeah,
beginning, even when I first started talking about this, I was very selective with what I would say and what I'd admit to. Like, I was like, "I'm not even gonna admit that I was in college Republicans in college because I'm gonna get canceled." And it's like, "Okay, you know who I am. I'm happy to justify why I believe what I believe." Even liberal people, I have a lot of common beliefs with, whether or not they believe that we believe the same things,
I
we
totally
actually do.
understand this.
Um, and I'm open to independence, and I'm open to supporting Democrats that agree with me on my issues. I've seen a limited number. I hope that will change. I think it's freeing. Right now, I'm working on policy stuff for the Independent Women's Forum. We're working on something called the Women's Bill of Rights. So we're kind of it's essentially just puts into law the term men and women, justifies and explains, you know, if it's a women's team, there must be people who are born female. If it's a men's team, so on and so forth. Just basically putting into law things that never should have had to be put into law is the best way to explain it. And we're working on that in individual states. So I've gotten to travel to a lot of states. I'm going to be very close to hitting all 50. I will do a review once I hit all 50. I think I have, like, 13 more to go. And some of that came from traveling for swimming, and some of that came from some of the work we've started doing, so hopefully
If
get
you
to all
come to
50 soon.
Austin, let me know.
I will be in Austin, I'll plug this. I will be in Austin on September 16th
Okay.
for there's a speaking event with Texas Values. I'm not sure when this will come out, but, my family actually lives in Austin, so
Oh,
I have been out there, many times. My mom's sister lives in Austin. One of my
okay.
cousins lives there
We'll
too.
have
Mhm.
to trade numbers when we get off, and we
Yes.
can get together when you're in town.
For sure. But yeah, so I mean, that's what I'm working on now, and I think, like, this is not to, like, hype up this issue, but I really do think this is the biggest social issue of the upcoming election cycle, and so now is really, like, the time to strike, right? Because things there's just more pressure on things with the election cycle. I wish it wasn't that way, but that's how it goes. So just we're gonna be pretty busy, I guess, for the next year, and then after, like, the election cycle happens and dies down and everything, I guess I'll just see where I'm at, whether there'll be other social issues or other political issues I'm gonna somehow find myself involved in or have opinions on that people wanna hear about. I mean, I'm sure people are tired of hearing my voice already,
No.
but we'll see. I do have an engineering degree. I was working as a product manager, so maybe I'll revisit going into that back to that and working again. But yeah, for the time being, I mean, it's just I'm not really sure. It's just through the election, we're gonna work on this issue. We're gonna work on it in the governments, hoping maybe one day we get it up to a federal level. That's yeah, in short, what I'm working on.
It's great. What is your, I ask the same two questions at the end of my podcast. What's your biggest defect of character?
Oh, okay. So I think in a way that I'm a little bit too nice sometimes on these things. In general, I've always just been too accommodating and I kind of get myself walked on a little bit. And because of that, I also, if I read a negative comment, I'm really obsessed with that. And so I think that's something I definitely want to work on where I take a little bit like I'm like trying my best to please everyone and I end up pleasing nobody. That's the best way to
Hmm.
explain it. So I think just working on just being more comfortable and confident in just what I know that I'm doing, and I know that it's the right thing, and I do know that, but just not getting carried away with people who disagree and people who don't like me because and this is a quote I'll bring in, I was just thinking about this, is I was always told this from a young age, is that there's gonna be people that like you for the wrong reasons, people that like you for the right reasons, people who don't like you for the wrong reasons, and people that don't like you for the right reasons. And everyone, like, falls into that category, and I was just thinking about that again, reflecting on that, is that sometimes I get a little too carried away with the category of the people who don't like me, for the wrong reasons, and
Hmm.
thinking that those reasons might be right. So that's something I wanna work on, and I think it's, like it's hard, and it's not something I think I'll ever really fully be comfortable with, but it is something I wanna work on.
Yeah, and I think too, just I don't know, you'd probably surprise yourself over time and aging and just speaking. Every time you kind of speak your truth, you embolden other. If you, like you said, it just feels good to be honest. I think every time you're honest, it is like a muscle that gets stronger, and it also inspires other people to be honest. You part of like what you explained earlier is just this culture of silence and fear that so many people live under. But having women like yourself who go out and they say, here's how what my experience was, very bravely, and I think it does inspire other people to do the same, or at least gives them a little bit of courage to speak up if they're feeling scared or if they're feeling like they can't. So I don't know. I think like you'll probably be surprised that, because I know for somebody, the older I've gotten, the less I've just like given an F, you just stop caring. Like the road narrows a little bit about who you're worried about. I definitely care a lot less about what people think of me now than I did in my 20s. And I think that's true with most people. So I believe that the more you speak and do this, the more comfortable you'll get with just kind of standing in your center. My therapist says something that I love. She always says we have to get away from being self-centered and instead be centered in ourselves. And I love that.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Because I think being self-centered too, you worry more about people pleasing and doing things kind of for the wrong reason or accolades or approval. And when you're centered in yourself, you really that's where you're coming from always, which is, not easy. And what's your biggest asset?
I think my ability to just go and do something that I want to and just take risks. I think that's like something I've always done, things that are just quote unquote risky. Even before this, obviously like taking my job was like a huge leap of faith, and even studying engineering in college was a huge like leap of faith. Like there have been so many times in my life where people have told me, don't do that. It's not a good idea. Or you're going to like even my school telling me you're going to regret speaking out about this. Well, I have, and it's opened up all these doors of opportunity and allowed me to feel comfortable in who I am. But the thing that I think about the most is actually like, so I wanted to study engineering in college. I'm actually dyslexic. So math was something that was like a very on and off subject for me. On the days that I was feeling good, it would be great. On the days I was not feeling good, it would be disastrous. And my parents just said, don't do that to yourself. Go to college. Like the whole idea of college is networking and making friends and this and that. Just study something a little easier. You'll be happier. You'll have more time to swim and socialize. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to enroll in the engineering school. And then the first semester was disastrous. Of course it was. And they were like, you need to reconsider what you're doing. And I was like, no, I know who I am and I'm going to prove you wrong. And I'm going to do this and I'm not going to regret it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just knowing like in yourself of when it's time to make risks. And of course you take risks and you end up thinking maybe I shouldn't have done that. But it's more about having done the thing. And then even if it didn't end up well, at least you like knew in your heart that you followed what you wanted to do, even if the outcome wasn't great. And I didn't graduate cum laude. I was actually a rounding decimal place away from it. I don't want to get into it. It's still a sore subject in my mind. I could have if I studied something else, but I didn't. And in the end, like the risk of doing what I did, like I know in my heart that I'm happy that I tried that, even if maybe at the end the outcome wasn't what it necessarily needed to be. So I would say that.
I love that. Yeah. Leap and the net will appear, as they say. Well, where can we find you and keep up with you? This has been so great. I really appreciate you talking to me. I just really have so much respect for you and for your bravery and honesty. And I'm a person who thinks bravery is, thrown around very loosely in this in our culture. But I think that you deserve that. You deserve that all the people who are telling you you're brave, you actually are, because we do live in this strange time. Oh, I do have one more question that I forgot to ask.
Yes.
Is the college being like sued for free speech or anything like that for trying to kind of force people into not saying anything? Is there any legal ramifications for them or no?
No, I've been approached by a lot of lawyers, believe it or I mean, not
I
believe it or
believe
not, of
it.
course I have. I mean, people are dying to pick this up. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, and this is interesting, at least what I've learned in the limited conversations I've even had with these people, is just that private institutions are a lot harder to sue. Unfortunately, my school is not a state university. I think this would be very different if it were. Um, and I
Right.
think it's
That
just
makes sense.
it's a different just beast of le
Right,
legality.
right. It's a private
Um,
company. They can do what they want.
yeah, and I think people have looked into it, and honestly, like, and again, being in lawsuits is really difficult. I know this from my own sexual assault experience, and I don't really like talking about this because I don't like to divulge. But it's on the internet if people want to find it. Um, but it's very limiting. It's very restrictive in what you can talk about occasionally. If you end up losing, you could end up getting, you know, you can be restricted. Your speech can be restricted by law.
Yeah.
On the instances, I think there have been people who have been looking into maybe a full thing for the NCAA. I think that might be a more strong suit where, my story can come in, Riley's story can come in. There's a few other NCAA athletes that have signed their name quietly onto things.
Mm-hmm.
Two of my teammates have signed a few things with their names on it. Again, they're not outspoken, but if you look, they're there. And other girls, on Riley's team at Kentucky, there's a girl at NC State, Kylie, who's talked about this a few times. So there would be room for maybe something like that. And I don't know what it would look like. I don't know what the logistics would be. I'm not a lawyer. Um, but it's so hard. And that's what everyone's like, why don't you guys just sue the university? And it's like, if you actually look into these things, it is very hard to do this. And it's time, it's money, it's a lot of our own resources and
It's their
capacity that.
name getting dragged through the mud, and yeah.
So, but yeah, maybe we're working on some things. I think there have been preliminary discussions. I've been a part of. Nothing super detailed. I would, not holding anything
Yeah.
back. But I guess it's just kind of we have to see how the cards fall, and maybe we'll uncover something from somebody else. There have been girls at Harvard and Yale who have also talked about silencing from their institutions, and there's actually Harvard wrote something in print. You can find it on Riley's Twitter. A Harvard girl reached out to her and sent her like the physical email that they were sent in regards to Lia Thomas. So there's a lot of evidence there, but it's just, does it work into a case? I don't know.
Right. Interesting. Oh, wow. What interesting times we live in. Well, thank you
Definitely.
so much for sitting down with me. And where can we find you online?
Yes, I'm Paula Scanlan on Twitter. I'm most active on Twitter. I'm also the same username on Instagram if that's your preferred social media. But yeah, I appreciate your time. And if there's anything you need from me in the future, just need a open-minded person to chat with, I'm here.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. And just good luck with everything. I hope we stay in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.